what are we gonna start with?
Piemonte.
Piemonte, right? So Brovia winery, right? Piemonte is a place.
Piemonte is up in the northwest of Italy. It is one of the most important regions for wine in the whole country, and it's most famous for Barolo, which is both a town and the name of a wine. All of these wines today we're tasting come from Barolo specifically, which is a small area within the Langhe. The Langhe is what we kind of consider like a county in America. It's got three main subzones, including Barolo, Barbaresco, and Roero, but all of these three wines today come from Barolo itself.
Yeah. And, Brovia is an old established winery. 1863 is when it started, and it's a traditional winery in the sense that they believe in tradition, but there's a lot of misconceptions about Barolo, I think that we'll get into in a little bit. They're specifically in the province of Castellone Folletto, and to give you a little more picture of where we are in the world, that's the Piemonte region that Gianpaolo was talking about, and then specifically the Langhe region is shown here, and Barolo is right down there, number 4. Yeah. Oh no, number 3. Ooh, don't hurt me.
So Piemonte is named after the foothills of the Alps. It's an area that is relatively high elevation. Most of these vineyards are about 300 to 400 meters from the sea level. And because of that, it's a really cool, unique microclimate where there's a very long growing season, which helps all of these varietals, particularly Nebbiolo, that is what Barolo is made with. It really likes a long, cool growing season. And it's very foggy because it's an area that's protected by a little kind of coastal mountain range in Liguria. And that fog is what Nebbiolo is named after, actually. Nebbia in Italian is fog, so Nebbiolo is a grape named after the fog that makes it so great.
Yeah. And as Somm Demand style is, if you have questions throughout this tasting, you can feel free to put them in the chat. We'd be more than happy to answer them that way. It is a friends and family event, so we are going to keep it casual. If you want to take yourselves off mute, please do so. Chime in, interrupt us, ask questions. If we feel like we need to table a conversation to the end, we're going to have some time. We're going to try to leave a roundtable discussion in the end. Sometimes these run long, sometimes they finish early, depending on how the group's engagement works. So if we feel like we want to table its topic and bring it back in the roundtable discussion, we might do that. Don't be offended, and really, really feel comfortable asking questions. We're going to have many different levels of wine experience in the room. Some of you may be, novice wine drinkers or new to the wine world. And Somm Demand is really about inclusivity. It's about education. It's about empowering the drinker to feel more comfortable around sommeliers in a restaurant on a wine list. And that's really what we're about. So please feel free to ask away. Otherwise, I got to listen to Gianpaolo's monotone voice all day, or you got to listen to my AED just run crazy all over this camera. So steer how you want it to go. We'd be more than happy to do that.
So why'd you pick Brovia for the first trio?
Because they're delicious. Because I'm biased and I love Brovia. That's the first reason. 2 is we mentioned that they are a traditional winery, but they definitely have a more contemporary feel. Maybe you could go into the history of Barolo being a little of a harder wine and things like that. Now most wineries have shifted into something more approachable. Brovia is definitely defined as elegance in my opinion. But yeah.
Historically, Piemonte was known for being a very poor and very cold area, so the wines were always kind of austere, even the Barbera and Dolcetto, which we'll get into later. But climate change and a lot of technological innovations, both in the winery and in the vineyards, have made the wines a lot more approachable in recent vintages. And Brovia, I think, epitomizes that more than any other winery. They totally respect tradition. Nothing they're doing is avant-garde or modern, but the wines have a really bright, fresh style that I think is kind of a universal appeal. Even if you've never had Italian wine before, some of these are going to appeal to a more, international California style of palate, but they're still very traditional at the same time.
Absolutely, and that actually brings us to the next point. So we've got 3 wines from Brovia in front of us. They're all from the Langhe, and contextually speaking, Dolcetto, Barbera, and then Barolo, which is made from Nebbiolo. why not just do all of one? What's going on with these 3 grapes?
So these are the 3 main red grapes of the Langhe, and they all have different places in the everyday culture there. Dolcetto is kind of an everyday red wine that is meant to be drunk with food. It has a little bit of tannin to it, but it's really quite easy drinking, quite pleasing. Just an everyday simple wine that you can enjoy without thinking too much about on a Tuesday. Whereas Barbera is a little bit brighter, fresher, a little bit more Pinot-like, and Barolo is the most famous of the 3 by far. Barolo is made with Nebbiolo, 100%, and it is a style of wine that is very, very complex, both aromatically and on the palate, and it really benefits from an extended time in the cellar. These wines can age 30, 40, 50 years, no problem. But Brovia makes a style that is very approachable also in its youth.
Roby also makes a few different Barolos, which we won't get into. There are single vineyard Barolos. They have some of the best holdings in Barolo. I guess that's the advantage you get when you start your winery in the 19th century. So they do have some great holdings in Serralunga that we won't get into. They're in Castellone Folletto, which again we won't get into. We're just kind of unpacking Barolo in just the smallest sense with this tasting here, but trying to give you guys an idea of maybe wines to look for, grapes to look for on your wine list and whatnot. So I know that some people were asking before, and if you heard me say this already, I do apologize. Open everything that you plan on drinking tonight. Hopefully that background on those grapes will give you an idea of maybe what you want to open if you're by yourself, or if your partner doesn't drink that much, or wherever it may be. We're going to be drinking all 3 because, we're
professionals.
Yeah, we're professionals. So, we got ours open. We're going to do wine 1 is going to be Dolcetto, wine 2 is going to be Barbera, and wine 3 is going to be Barolo. And you want to tell them a little about the importance of starting with one,
Sure.
over the other, or why we chose this order or whatnot?
So the order in which you drink wine is going to affect how you taste wine, because if you drink a very rich wine and then go back to a light wine, it's going to accentuate how light that wine is. In this case, we felt that the Dolcetto that we're going to start with really is a good example of tannin in a wine, whereas the Barbera really showcases acidity, and the Nebbiolo is just on another level in terms of complexity, both texturally and flavor-wise. So the main structural elements in wine are acidity and tannin, and Dolcetto is a wine that has a little bit more tannin than acidity. Tannin and acidity are both perceived differently in the mouth. Acidity tends to make your mouth water, whereas tannin tends to dry your mouth out. A good example of each of those is Cabernet Sauvignon, which has a lot of tannin and very little acid, and Pinot Noir, which has a lot of acidity and very little tannin. Those are wines that I assume many of you have tasted at some point. And these wines are a little bit different because most Italian wines, especially from Piemonte, tend to have relatively high levels of both acidity and tannin. Especially when we get to the Barolo later on, you'll notice both of them. But Dolcetto, the tannin stands out a little bit more.
So as we get into tasting here, I just want to give an opportunity if anyone wants to chime in and ask any questions at this moment. I'm going to start to examine the wine. Take yourselves off mute if you'd like. Give it a little smell. Damn, we got a bunch of professionals in the room. So, you talked a little bit about acidity, talked about tannin. We haven't touched on concentration, which would be the 3rd component of structure of wine. But even before we taste the wine, which please go ahead, smell, give a sip. Is it anyone's first wine tasting? Also, I should have prefaced that. I know most of us have drunk together, so maybe it's not. But if there is, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll assume you know the swirl, smell, all that stuff. So, I love color. Color is vibrant. Color tells me a little bit about the wine. The smell also gives me a lot. That's the aromatic. I think the aroma is super important with wine, but I know you have some feelings about the color of wine. Would you care to share with our guests about the color?
Absolutely. I think color is something that is a little bit misunderstood, especially here in California, because some of the most famous wines in the state are from Napa and made with Cabernet Sauvignon, which tend to be very, very dark, almost inky in color. And a lot of people tend to associate that with quality. This flight we're doing today is a really good example of how color does not necessarily equate with quality, because none of these 3 varietals are known for their color. Nebbiolo, especially when we taste the Barolo later, is known for having a relatively pale color. yet it's one of the most famous and important wines in the world. So color is, for me, more important in distinguishing a grape from another grape. Like when I look at a Nebbiolo, I don't want to see purple color, because that would lead me to believe that maybe the wine is picked a little bit too ripe. Maybe they blended some grapes in illegally. Nebbiolo should be
Never.
a more...
In Italy? Breaking the laws? You gotta be kidding.
The Italians are good at it. Nebbiolo for me should be kind of brilliant ruby red with a little bit of a kind of orange breaking color. Barbera should be a little bit more purple, and Dolcetto should look something like Nebbiolo, but maybe a touch darker.
Mm-hmm.
So none of these wines are going to be super inky or dark. They're all going to be translucent and transparent. And to me, that is really key to understanding what each wine is and what it should be like.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I have to agree with Gianpaolo, even though we're both contrarians. It's nice to appreciate, but contextually, it doesn't offer me as much as far as the quality of the wine. Also, I know we have a Napa winemaker in the room here, and I won't expose that person, but I've heard stories of things that are added to get color to wines and things like that. Not from him, he would never share it with me, but maybe his friends or something like that. So color is something that's fascinating, but really not quite as important as, to me, something that I stick with in the Somm tastings. We've done multiple tastings, throughout the pandemic. And what I found to be the best format for most tastings was to do what Gianpaolo taught me very early on in my career, which was acid, structure, and concentration, or acidity, tannin, and concentration, pardon me. All those go into the structure of wine. And if you're trying to learn your palate, or you're learning a bit about what you like or what you don't like, falling back on those three things is really definitely something I still do to this day, and it can definitely empower young drinkers or you newer drinkers, well, we're all young, to I feel that way.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well, you've been old since you were 14. Empower newer drinkers or younger drinkers to actually have something to stand on. And I don't think does that foundation change for you to this day?
No, to me, what he's saying is absolutely true, because flavors are very, very subjective. But when you're talking about the acidity and tannin and concentration of a wine, those are relatively objective flavors and textures. We can all agree if a wine makes our mouth water or if it dries it out much faster than we can agree on whether a wine tastes like strawberry, raspberry, or cranberry. So for me, if you know that you like wines with a lot of tannin, the flavor is a little bit less important. If you know you like wines that are lighter and brighter with more acidity, again, the flavor is less important. That structure is really what guides my personal taste, and whenever I'm talking to guests at the floor at the restaurant, that's what I find to be the most effective way to communicate with them.
And I do the opposite, even though I know it's wrong, just to piss him off from time to time. So, Dolcetto. To me, Dolcetto, if I may, I feel the tannin on this a little bit, right? And did you mention the I don't listen to you. Did you mention what the sensation of tannin is on the palate?
Drying your mouth out.
Drying your mouth out, yeah. I get almost like a dustiness, like a little dusty texture, and sophisticated palates like Gianpaolo's can actually feel the fineness of tannin. They can be coarser, they can be softer. To me, they're all the same. No, but seriously, oak tannins will hit you up in the gums sometimes. Stem tannins, which we won't get into, fine with whole cluster fermentation, Pinot Noir will hit you in the middle of the tongue. Dolcetto is a really nice example of moderate acidity. It's not really like there. What I feel is that drying sensation on my palate.
It's also a really good example of grape tannins, because this wine is done in stainless steel, so there's no oak involved and there's no stems involved in the winemaking process. So this is just pure. It is a pure expression of Dolcetto, and a really classic example of it.
Yeah, that's a great point with the stainless fermentation. Again, ask questions if you don't like, if you'd like to. We probably don't have so much time to get into stainless versus barrel fermentation or new barrique and things like that. But these are all kind of little things that just go to tell you the complexity of wine, the complexity of wine world, and why I think we're still engaged with it is because we're ever curious about why these wines taste this way. So if you are having a little hard time picking up on the tannin, I think that it'll be really great to go on to the Barbera. I'm going to pour G a little more Dolcetto, and then we're going to go on to the Barbera here.
While he does, I think it's important to touch on the fact that all of these, and many Italian wines in general, are considered food wines. And what that means is that they are not meant to be standalone wines. In California, a lot of producers tend to make wines that get high scores, that are kind of trophy bottlings, that are so smooth that they really don't feel like they have any texture. And those wines are fantastic in their own right, but they are not so good at the table. A lot of big California wines are good with a piece of steak, and that's about it. Whereas the wines we're tasting today are much more versatile. A good example is Dolcetto, which in Piemonte is classically served at the first course. They don't make a whole lot of white wine there. They just kind of go red all through the meal. And the classic appetizer for them is called carne cruda, which is very coarsely chopped raw beef, kind of tartare.
Are you giving us a pairing?
Yeah.
You giving us a wine pairing?
I am.
Wow.
Once in a while.
Once in a while.
It's really simply done just with olive oil and salt, so it's a really pure expression of beef. And Dolcetto is great with it because it's got just enough tannin to kind of soften the meat. They kind of just meld together perfectly. Neither one overpowers the other. A really good example also is just any kind of salumi, charcuterie. It's a really good appetizer kind of red, or almost hors d'oeuvre style red, if you will.
And to fill you in on why I was, asking Gianpaolo was going to pairing is because we are constantly going back and forth about, the subjectivity of pairings, the capabilities you have to actually pair wines at home and things like that. But thank you for giving people the traditional dish that the Dolcetto would go with, because I do think it's important in the context, so I appreciate that. Yeah.
We also think it's really important to taste these wines without food the first time you taste through them, because it really helps you to understand the structural elements and the flavor elements of the wine. If we were drinking these wines at home, we would not have them on their own. We would certainly have something in front of us to snack on. But just in terms of understanding them better, it's good to do them alone.
Thank you. I didn't mean to hit that earlier. I appreciate that. And so if you're someone like Nick James, maybe you take a Beyond sausage and you throw it in a toaster oven or something like that. What do you do? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so an excellent pairing. I just think it's hilarious that Nick's favorite grape is Syrah, and it's like one of the best meat wines in the world. I think it's hilarious. So instantly, right off the bat, so I poured Barbera. We've got people who've already Devin's already got 3 glasses out. So what the great part about having multiple glasses is being able to go back and forth from one wine to another. Again, we've got many different levels here. Even when you and I are tasting, we always have 2 glasses in front of us, just at least part of that's proper glassware, but even if it was this glass versus that glass, 2 universal glasses like this are great to be able to compare noses, to compare one sip to the next. I do subscribe to the 3-sip rule. Do you subscribe to the 3-sip rule as well?
What's the 3-sip rule?
3-sip rule. I actually don't know if you subscribe to the 3-sip rule. Well, the 3-sip rule is that I like to stick with at least 3 sips before making a decision about a wine. I actually know he doesn't subscribe to the 3-sip rule because Gianpaolo is the fastest industry taster. We get all these people coming in with bags all the time, and when you're trained by Gianpaolo, you just like next wine spit, next wine spit, next wine spit, and he's got an amazing palate, and it really allows you to taste so many wines so fast. But in my own now, I like to take 3 sips, if you believe it or not, just to really get the wine, because when you transition from one to another, if you have a palate like Gianpaolo's, you don't have to take 3 sips. If you're deciding on a wine whether or not you like it or whether you're learning a grape, I think it's really important to stick with 3 sips. So, before you go back to the Dolcetto, make sure you take 3 sips of that Barbera, and then you'll be able to get that contrast going back to the Dolcetto. Want to give a little smell? You're already drinking it. Yeah.
So where the Dolcetto was a little bit deeper and darker on the nose, Barbera tends to be a little bit more bright and high-toned, a little bit more red fruit compared to dark red or black fruit. And Barbera is a grape that is a really, really crowd-pleasing wine. It tends to be similar to Pinot Noir in the sense that it has really bright acidity and really juicy dark fruit. That acidity is what makes your mouth water. When I drink this, the fruit is so rich and full, but then on the finish, my mouth is just salivating and makes me want to eat something or drink more wine. So it's something that I go back to very frequently.
Do you think a wine like Dolcetto or a wine like Barbera is like more of a food wine, or are they both kind of just pleasing in the sense you can drink them on their own?
They're food wines in very different ways. I think Dolcetto is maybe a little bit more of a food wine because simply Barbera is a little more standalone. Barbera's lack of tannin relatively makes it easier to drink on its own, whereas the Dolcetto tannins on the ends make it a little tougher to drink on its own.
Yeah, because the acidity for me kind of brings me back for more. You feel similarly about that acid like brings it through.
Exactly.
You want more.
Yeah, the acid is something that we don't always perceive as much in red wine. It's more commonly associated with white wine and champagne. It's what really gets you going, and that's why champagne and sparkling wines are considered aperitifs, because they get your mouth watering and they get you ready to start a meal. Barbera has a very similar effect, but it has enough fruit that it can stand in the middle of a meal as well. I really love Barbera as kind of a pizza wine. It's just,
another pairing.
I'll throw a few out.
Wow, did you get my requests for the tasting today?
I adhere to a few of them. So it's great with something like pizza because the brightness and the acidity of the wine really bring out that kind of tangy sweetness of the tomato sauce, and the acidity also helps to cut through the creamy texture of whatever kind of cheese you've got on top. If you've got pepperoni or something like that, sausage, the juicy fruit is a really nice contrast to that meaty flavor as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got into a nice discussion earlier about, or the other day about these wines are somewhat interchangeable in the sense that they go with the cuisines of the area in this way or that way. And then I was just like pushing him to get a little more specific on the pairings, and I thank you so much for doing that.
Well, Barbera is so versatile that at Acquarello, the 2-star Michelin restaurant that I work at, we actually pair it with a really slow roasted quail that's glazed with truffle honey while it's roasting on a binchotan grill and served with chard and a little strawberry vinegar. So you can do a super elevated dish with Barbera or something as simple as pizza. It really runs the gamut in terms of versatility.
Yeah, and so you still have Barbera by the glass. I mean, as far as I worked at Acquarello, you always had Barbera by the glass.
Pretty much always.
Yeah.
And Barbera is kind of an insider secret. If you go to an Italian restaurant and you're not sure what to order, almost any Italian list will have Barbera. And Barbera is relatively fairly priced compared to something like Barolo or Super Tuscans or Brunello. So Barbera is crowd pleasing, approachable, and relatively easy to find. So it's something to keep in the back pocket as a really good option.
That's a great Somm tip. I actually, when I find myself with my family or something like that, because I know my mom likes the Pinots and things like that, it's a safe bet. I think that's a great tip to take with them. Dolcettos to me are a little more kind of variable in quality. Is that
certainly? Yeah. There's a lack of consistency when it comes to Dolcetto in terms of style, not quality. But a lot of Dolcettos are made in a very low alcohol style that is almost Beaujolais-like, where they're really bright and fresh and juicy. This is a more classic style of Dolcetto where you feel that tannin a little bit. It's a little more structured. And then there are even some Dolcettos from Dogliani, for instance, where they don't grow Nebbiolo, so Dolcetto gets all the best vineyard sites, and it tends to be more like 15% alcohol and really juicy and dark and fleshy.
Yeah.
So Dolcetto is a lot more, there's a wider range of Dolcetto out there.
Yeah.
So it's harder to be sure what you're getting with Dolcetto than it is with Barbera.
Yeah. I have to agree. And to put it in context for you guys, we threw the pack together and, Somm Demand style, we just, charge the retail value. We try to give you a bunch of stuff on top of it. I know you're our friends and family, but our concept is to just really, charge you for the wine and then give you as much as we can on top of that as anyone else would. So the Dolcetto would be the most price-friendly wine in the group at, 20, 22 or 23 retail. Barbera is slightly more than that, but in Dogliani, they're going to be more expensive than the Barbera that we're drinking today, correct?
Generally speaking, they will be, yeah. And they're generally done in oak. They're just a bigger, more extracted style. Mm-hmm. Not much like what we're drinking today.
And then I know you guys heard me talking about retails in the 20s and the high 20s. So you're like, well, where are the wine? Well, Barolo is definitely the king of wines in Piemonte, and it calls for a much higher price point than either of these two. So, Barolo, this is going to be a more kind of modern, approachable style of Barolo compared to, well, I don't want to use the word modern, the more
elegant.
current as well, right? I mean, Barolo and Piemonte and climate change, technology, that's changed a little bit.
Yeah, before we move on to Barolo though, I think if you have Barbera and Dolcetto in your glass, now would be a good opportunity to go back to the Dolcetto after the Barbera, because you really felt that acidity in the Barbera, and if you didn't feel the tannin so much in the Dolcetto, going back to it after tasting the Barbera will really make it stand out.
100%.
The Dolcetto is going to feel a lot drier, a lot more structured. The tannins are really going to jump out of the glass. So I think these two wines really represent both acidity and tannin very well.
Yeah, it smells so much darker as well.
Yeah, a lot deeper.
This worked out better than I anticipated as far as that acid to tannin contrast. Usually in the Somm Demand tasting we do a white, and then a tannin red that is a little more exposed. So this is the first time we've kind of done a trio of reds, and I think it's really nice to be able to see that structure there. That's great.
Can we drink some Barolo now?
We can. I thought you'd never ask. You're the one slowing up the Barolo tasting. You had to go back to Barbera and Dolcetto.
Just trying to give everybody more information.
So it'd be fun if in the chat, since everyone's so quiet, if you guys want to put in the chat, I'd love to hear, you know, which wine you prefer between the Dolcetto and Barbera. I don't know. I don't want to tell them if I had a preference. I still don't even know which one I like more. But I would love to see it. Oh, Nick, did you just put that in after I said that?
It's good. Yeah, I thought the Barbero was like something I preferred, and then going back, now I'm not so sure, because I think that the Dolcetto after you try the Barbera is a lot more interesting. Yeah, it's cool trying and coming back and forth.
Yeah. I'm going to throw Chase on the spot here. Chase said, I like the pairing commentary. When I drink wine, it's normally with dinner. And what I'm drinking depends on the meat. And so.
Bravo. That's absolutely what you should be doing.
Yeah.
I think that's very European of you. In America, we tend to drink wine on its own, and in Europe, that is almost never the case. So.
Well, in America, we tend to just drink on it.
That too.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but these wines certainly excel with food rather than on their own.
Yeah. And then Barbera's my jam. That is to be expected because I love her. Okay, Devin. Yeah. We couldn't win you over with this Dolcetto, huh?
I mean, it's really solid, but it's hard to beat a Barbera in my mind.
Yeah.
So.
Do you often find yourself?
I can't make up my mind here yet, so we'll see.
That's good. Stay that way.
If you guys are not eating and you can't make up your mind between the two, I would urge you to try Dolcetto later with something to eat, because Dolcetto will really excel when you have something in your mouth other than wine. Whereas Barbera, like, yeah, it will be better with food too, but not to the extent that Dolcetto will.
Maybe we'll open the Dolcetto for real instead of just the Corvette. We'll have that with dinner tonight.
There you go.
Yeah, I will say on its own, I do favor the Barbera just a kiss, but you're already onto the Barolo.
I've been on Barolo.
Oh man, that nose.
So Nebbiolo is the grape behind Barolo. Nebbiolo grows all over Piemonte, all over the Langhe, and Barolo is the most famous region within that Nebbiolo grows in. Nebbiolo is really famous for its complexity. It has really kind of haunting, lifted, floral aromatics. It just jumps out of the glass and draws you in at the same time. And It's a really good example of a grape that has both high acidity and high tannin. When you taste this wine, it's going to make your mouth water, and it's going to dry your mouth out at the exact same time. For that reason, Barolo, I think, is much less famous than its counterparts in Burgundy or Bordeaux or Napa, because it's a lot harder to understand. It takes a lot of time to sit with Nebbiolo and let it evolve and open up.
Do you mind to touch on that a little bit? You guys will see on the bottle we have the DOCG. I won't butcher the pronunciation in front of you. If you weren't here, I would do it. But you have such a better Italian accent, if you don't mind. What does it stand for, and what's going on? Like, why is Barolo not labeled by the grape? Break down Italy for us on that.
Sure. So in Italy, there are essentially there are four, but really three main denominations that are used for wine. The lowest is Vino Tavola. It's very rarely used anymore. IGT is something you see very often. It's kind of a catch-all appellation. You'll see it a lot in Tuscany, especially. If you see Toscana on a label, it means they can put pretty much anything they want into that bottling. DOC and DOCG are Denominazione Origine Controllata and Garantita. It basically means a denomination of origin that is controlled, and then the top line is also guaranteed. So it's meant to be, it's meant to tell you where the grapes are grown and how they're made, and in the term of DOCG, that they're also of a certain quality, that all the producers in the consortio agree on actually bestowing this little strip onto every bottle. So Barolo is always DOCG. It is the top in terms of appellation, in terms of quality. Not all Barolo is created equal, of course, but generally speaking, when you see a DOCG label or a sticker on a bottle, it's not going to be a bad wine.
And it abides by certain laws and regulations that Gianpaolo refuses to stay current on, because he says they're changing all the time, and Italy's always this and that, and then breaking the rules. But it takes a lot of time to make Barolo as well. It calls for such higher price, and it's a pretty finicky grape as well. Nebbiolo is, right? I mean, if you were a producer, would you be making Barbera and Dolcetto on top of Barolo, or I mean, why wouldn't you just make everything?
Well, so Nebbiolo doesn't grow well everywhere. First of all, it doesn't grow very well outside of Italy. There are very few exceptions. There are a couple interesting examples in California and Oregon and Australia. But even within Italy, it pretty much only grows in Piemonte and Lombardia, with a tiny exception in Sardinia. But it really calls for a very particular microclimate that we touched on earlier, with the long, cool growing season and the clouds and the fog. So Nebbiolo doesn't grow everywhere. And if Nebbiolo is planted in a less than good site, it's going to accentuate some of the negative attributes of Nebbiolo, like the tannins can be too high, the acidity can be too high, and in lesser areas, Nebbiolo's balance just gets thrown out of whack. And because there's high acid and high tannin, balance is really key in making Nebbiolo at a high level. Trying to figure out how to get enough ripeness where you have fruit that can stand up to the tannins without the acid going away. It's really a work of art when Nebbiolo is made into a beautiful Barolo.
Yeah, I mean, 17 was a warm year. Vintage is probably the last thing to really dial in. That's what you always shared with me. But when I drink this, I'm thinking about 17 is a warm year. I still feel these tannins, and I feel tons of acidity, and I also feel almost like a silkiness. So it's like the tannins are there, but they're not coarse per se.
Yeah, and that's what we touched on earlier also about the quality of tannins. Tannins can either be very ripe and sweet and feel very long, or they can be a little bit underripe and coarse and feel kind of short and choppy. That's just talking about grape tannins, not to mention what you can get from oak-aged wines that tend to be a little more coarse and dry. Stems, you mentioned, also can add tannins too. But in this case, Barolo is the more traditional style, is to age in very large old oak barrels, more like casks than barrels. So what we see in Napa are generally 225 to 250 liter barrels, and the wines that we're talking about in Piemonte are literally 10 to 100 times that size. They're massive, massive casks that don't add any flavor to the wine, so you're not going to get oak flavor. It's just really a vessel for the wine to evolve slowly in the cellar before it's bottled.
Yeah. And I know we went over this earlier, guys. I do apologize, Nikki. I'm letting my tech guy down because I don't have the dual screen capabilities that I will once develop in this studio. But on the actually, I could do a second screen share here. Yeah. But on these barrels here, as he was talking about, we have the Botti and the concrete fermenters, but the Botti, are a really big oak, as you were mentioning. When you see, you're at a wine bar and you got these barriques, right? You said 225 hectoliters, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, barriques. They're much smaller, and I think these guys use 105 or something like that.
Yeah,
on
they're
that.
huge.
Yeah, and do you want to talk about what new wood versus old wood does? I think that it was really great to have these wines, stainless steel, and then we're really tasting grapes, which is really hard to do with California Pinot and California Cabernet because they're pretty adulterated, right?
Yeah, a lot of, not just California, but a lot of New World wines tend to be made in small oak barrels and relatively new oak barrels that contribute spice and tannin. If you've ever had a Pinot that has kind of a cinnamon or vanilla flavor going on, that is probably not from the grape, it's probably from the oak barrel that it was aged in. And in these particular wines from Brovia, that is not an issue. These wines are all very transparent and really classic representations of the grape variety because they're aged in neutral vessels.
Yeah. Or if you get little by little wines, those are also fairly transparent to the grape. John Mulray, who makes that wine, is in the room today. Chenin Blancs, Cab Francs, as well as some Carignan from California.
Delicious.
Yeah, really good stuff. A little off the beaten path, but yeah, I think that's really great. The tan. To me, not to focus too much on the tannins here, and then also I put concrete fermenters there because the Nebbiolos they're doing in concrete, and the Barolo, the Dolcetto and the Barbera they're doing in stainless.
Yeah.
So, what's the decision there? Why with Nebbiolo? I've even seen it fermented in open 2-tonners, which is giving it a bunch of oxygen. So what's the advantages of fermenting Nebbiolo and something like that?
So Nebbiolo likes to breathe. Stainless steel is, for the Dolcetto and Barbera is an anaerobic environment, so there is no exchange of oxygen when the wines are going through their aging process, and that keeps the wines really bright and fresh and vibrant. With Nebbiolo, you want freshness, but you also want the wine to breathe because it gives more development of flavor and texture and complexity when it has that opportunity. So Nebbiolo in stainless steel, relatively simple and bright in comparison. Another aspect to consider is that oak helps to fix tannins a little bit. So when you have a more tannic wine done in stainless steel, the tannins don't really have anything to integrate with. But if tannins are integrating in an oak barrel, they tend to soften a little bit more throughout that aging process.
So are tannins actual, like, you know, wine is subjective in the sense of I like it, I don't like it, it's fruity or it's not, but tannins are actual compounds in a wine, correct?
Yeah, tannin and acidity can actually be measured from a scientific standpoint. That said, we all perceive them differently. Some people feel acidity more, some people feel tannins more. And of course you can like them more or less, that's totally up to you. But they are quantifiable for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you're in this room and, you know, you don't like this Barolo. I wouldn't be surprised at all because it's intense. And I often think sometimes that as Somms we are, you know, we go through phases, right? We like this, we like that. And then eventually we wind up with, we want something with pushback, right? We want something that challenges our palate, that like gives us a little like, you know, lift on the palate, or you know, we love champagne or beer because it's just so refreshing after our palates are tired from all this red wine. So what would you say to someone who's, you know, not into this Barolo? Does that mean that they?
I would say drink more Barolo because it grows on you. It's not an easily appreciated wine. It's definitely an acquired taste. It's not obvious. It's not upfront. The aromatics maybe a little bit are. They're very pretty, but texturally it definitely takes some getting used to.
Yeah.
But
then,
what we love about the texture really is the tension. That's a word that you'll hear us talk about a lot over the course of these tastings. Tension is something that we use to describe kind of a push and pull between different elements of a wine. So when you have something like Nebbiolo that has high acidity that makes your mouth water, high tannin that makes your mouth dry, that is really kind of a tension. We'll find that in a lot of wines that we subscribe to.
absolutely. And then the other note I would make, I was trying to fish them into is, you know, we are trying these without food, as Gianpaolo mentioned earlier. You know, he mentioned if you the Dolcetto and you're undecided between the Barbera and Dolcetto, try the Dolcetto with food. It may grow on you a little bit. Barolo is one of those things, you know, if you know, cover your ears. If you have some cheese in front of you, go ahead and eat some cheese. You know, get some fat on the palate, freshen it up. You can kind of, you know, give it a little taste of Nebbiolo because your palates may be tired. You know, I don't think they drink as much as us. So I don't think.
I hope not.
Yeah, I hope not. So you know, palate fatigue is real. Intense acidity is real. We're drinking food wines. We're drinking high acid wines from the Barbera and the Barolo. We're drinking tannic wines. Your palate might be tired at this point. You're not crazy if, you know, it's a little astringent or it feels a certain way. You know, it's part of the journey, but it is really important to, you know, feel this right next to something like Barbera, right next to something like Dolcetto, and just the, you know, you mentioned complexity. You know, what does that even mean? You know, like what is complexity in wine? I mean,
well, complexity is completely subjective. It's totally in the eye of the beholder. But generally speaking, Barbera is a pretty straightforward, easy to understand wine. It's fruity, it's fresh, it has nice acidity. It can be a little more interesting. This is a very good example of Barbera. But Nebbiolo, the complexity is kind of what we alluded to earlier, where it's not so easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
The flavors are layered. There's not just one thing that jumps out. There are many different flavors, whether it's savory, whether it's fruity. Nebbiolo delivers a lot.
it's actually, yeah, I was just thinking, like, it's actually a good wine for a novice drinker if you're in a group that like wants a lot of tasting notes. We keep it pretty, you know, our philosophy is, you know, if you taste strawberries, that's fine. If you taste raspberries, that's fine. You know, I can't tell you what you taste, you know, what you taste is what you taste. But it is fun because, you know, if Gianpaolo says, I smell leather, I'm like, yeah, I smell leather. If you tell me I smell a bouquet of flowers, I say, yeah, I smell a bouquet of flowers. If you know, say you taste herbs, I'd say, yeah. If you say you taste fresh fruit, yeah. If you say you taste dirt, yeah. And I think that is...
The power of suggestion is real, but in the case of Nebbiolo, most of them are probably actually there.
Yeah, like I can't
Nebbiolo
really
does
like
have that many flavors
tell him
going
he's
on.
crazy. If he says he tastes pineapple, you know,
That's a stretch.
that's a stretch, right? I mean, so there is some type of, you know, objectivity and subjectivity in the sense of you know, there's real tannin, there's real acid, there's real concentration, which we haven't really touched on yet. These are all kind of in the same concentration, and then there's, you know, the subjectivity of flavors, and Nebbiolo really allows a long leash for those sommeliers to wax poetically of all the flavors in the world. Yes.
Certainly. In terms of structure, all of these wines really have a lot of aging potential. Generally speaking, Dolcetto is drunk pretty young, as is Barbera. They can easily go for about 10, 15 years, no problem. Barolo, on the other hand, is known for its incredible ageability. I mean, it's not uncommon to see 40, 50, 60-year-old Barolos in a restaurant wine list that are still really showing well and have a lot of flavor to give. That said, wines today are made in a much more approachable style. Brovia is a perfect example of that. This is a Barolo that you can drink well today. It's pretty open and really expressive today, but it's also going to benefit a lot of cellaring if you have enough that you want to put down for 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. So Ryan couldn't make a decision on the Dolcetto versus Barbera, but he can say that the Barolo is his favorite.
Fancy taste.
Oh, yeah. That was definitely my taste. That was great.
Yeah. Just, you know, Nick says just give it 30, 40 years if the tannins bother you. It'll dial back a little bit. Well, you know, we've got a couple other things, you know, go over, but, you know, we don't really need to get into that. I mean, we're winding down the last 10 minutes, and we do want people to feel, you know, comfortable asking questions or talking about the wines that they had. So we're going to open up an open forum for the last 10 minutes, and then we'll probably hang out, you know, for 5-10 minutes or so after that if some questions didn't get answered or whatnot. But, you know, before we lose another one or two at the 7 o'clock mark, you know, I think I speak for the whole Somm Band team for saying thank you for coming today. Thank you for supporting us again, and we hope you enjoyed this tasting today.
Yeah, I had fun. I hope everybody else did too.
Even in the heat?
Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead and take yourselves off mute. Ask John, I can't hear you clapping. It looks like you're squeezing a GAC like toy from Toys R Us. Oh, thanks, Neil. Neil, what are you eating?
So interesting. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. He's wiping off all the sweat from his brow, but it's hard work drinking in here, I'll tell you.
We need some air conditioning in here badly.
Yeah. Buy more packs so we can invest in an air conditioner.
Well, that's me.
What was that?
Wait, it's not me. I'm trying to figure out whoever it is.
That's Ruby you hear in the background barking.
She's not liking the Barolo.
She's not liking the...
Okay, David, I've got a question. Could you explain what structure is?
Structure. Yes.
Or what structure you like? Yeah.
Or what was the last part? Or what structure I like?
Right, like how would we know what structure?
Ah, absolutely. Well, let's break it down with these three wines. So the structure in wine, in the most simplest form, is acidity, which makes you salivate, tannin, which gives a grippy feeling or a drying sensation on your tongue, and then concentration. Would you like to tell them a little about concentration?
I think your example is better than mine.
No.
For once.
For once. Concentration is the actual weight on the palate of wine. So how to describe it best would be the milk example that the first thing Gianpaolo ever liked that came out of my mouth was, you know, non-fat milk versus whole milk, right? They're both milk. They both taste the same. They both have the same acidity, but one of them has so much more richness to them, right? And you can feel that on the palate. It kind of coats the palate. You know, when acid and tannin are thrown into there, you know, is perceived concentration, you know, a word for you, just like perceived tannin. You know, if you have tons of fruit, you know, Cabernets are super tannic. If you have tons of fruit, that makes it really concentrated. And you maybe don't feel the tannins as much. And the tannins also make the concentration feel a little less concentrated. And it's a really fully packed question, Ellen, but exploring more about, you know, these three in front of you, if you're gravitating more towards the Dolcetto, you may like tannin more. You know, and this is simplifying it. Everything's, you know, You know, this is as close to a straight across tasting as we can get. But Barbera, you know, it has that sensation of acidity. And if you're still trying to figure out what those two sensations are on your palate, I really would encourage you to focus on these two wines. And what makes Nebbiolo and Barolo so complex is that you're going to have both going off the palate. Concentration across the board, I mean, they're all, you know, moderate, medium, moderate,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, none of these are super concentrated. None of them are super light. They're all medium concentration.
you probably get a little more concentration in Barolo just because you need that much more kind of ripeness to make a wine like that. But as far as how they feel and their place and where we would drink them, they're all about the same in a lineup, right? Yeah.
Another fun way to think about structure is to think of acid as the kind of skeleton or the bones, whereas tannin is more the muscle and fruit is the fat.
I love that.
I like breaking it down like that because, you know, acid is always going to be there. Acid is the bones. It doesn't go away. It doesn't change over time, whereas tannin does change over time. Tannin's going to soften with age. So as the wine evolves, the tannin that you might feel really strong in its youth, it's going to get softer and softer as the wine ages, just like our muscles. And then fruit is like fat. You know, you've got baby fat in a really young wine. It's really juicy and fruity and fresh. And then as the wine evolves, the fruit becomes a little more ripe and mature, and eventually it starts to fade off as the wine gets very old.
Yeah.
So that's another fun way to think about structure.
Fruit fades, acid stays forever.
Acid is static, never changes.
Did that help, Ellen?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'll add that, you know, we want the Sommelier website to be a resource for all of this knowledge. So you can expect us to be kind of putting together like a glossary of these terms that makes it easy to kind of do your own research and learn about these things and really provide kind of an interactive and hopefully, you know, intuitively visualized understanding of things like structure and tannin and acid and concentration. And I hope that we were able to kind of bring those to you in a way that really kind of makes those concepts clear in a way that lets you bring them to places you go and order wine with that knowledge.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yay. Hey.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and to piggyback on that, perspective in wine is you know, there's many different ones, right? I mean, we're kind of from a certain school of no bullshit, right? I mean, proof is in the bottle, price doesn't dictate this and that, and that you're allowed to like something more than the sommelier, you know? You're allowed to spend your dollar on whatever you want, and our job, and Gianpaolo said this great the other day, we were doing a little pre-tasting talk, and it's like, what did you say? He said our goal should be to give them the resources to tell us how to suggest better wines.
Yeah, if we give you guys the tools to describe what you like in wine and dislike in wine, we can make better suggestions for what you're going to purchase in the future. Like, we have our own ideas about wine, of course. We know what we like. That doesn't mean that you have to like the same thing. Our job is really to be a translator, to understand what you're saying and translate that into what is going to be something that you're going to enjoy in a wine. And that's what we really love about this job.
Yeah.
Like, if this job was only about telling people what to drink, it'd be really boring. I like the interaction of it. I like hearing what people like and trying to interpret what they're actually saying, because let's be real, talking about wine is really, really messy. It's kind of a made-up language that we all choose to agree on. Of course, when you talk about a lot of these flavors, like, they're all really abstract flavors. This is just grape juice after all. So it's just something that we all have to get on the same page about. And the more we talk about these things, the more we can